everyone, my name's Emma. I'm from the Adventure Center, and today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about spring flowers. And before I begin, I just want to let out a little bit of a disclaimer that it's not recommended that you ingest edible plants due to possible serious consequences of misidentification and ingestion of pesticides and fertilizer. The learning outcomes for today's presentation is going to be that you're going to be able to identify 3 common plants that I'm going to talk about today, and those are going to be the red dead nettle, the Downy Serviceberry, and the blue violet. The second learning outcome is going to be to understand the biology of spring blooms and how they contribute to the reproduction of plant species. And the third one is going to be able to identify at least one non-native plant species in Virginia. And the last one is going to be describe how non-natives affect native plants in an ecosystem. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk to you about today is the biology of spring blooms and how they contribute to the reproduction of plant species. So plants begin to flower when days grow longer in the spring and the heat from the sun begins to awaken the plant. Flowers produce the pollen, which enables the plant to reproduce, and that pollen is carried by insects and animals who transfer it between the plants, and then that pollinates the flowers and allows them to produce offspring. And then the flowers eventually fall off the plant, leaving fruit or seeds for reproduction. Pretty much any insect or animal can contribute to pollination, the most popular ones being bees, hummingbirds, and butterflies, since they actually transfer from plant to plant, carrying the pollen on their bodies. Bees carry the pollen, which sticks to its furry legs while it collects the nectar for their honey. Hummingbirds, the pollen sticks to its feathers while it's eating the nectar. And butterflies, the pollen sticks to its furry legs and torso while it eats the nectar. Now I'm going to show you 3 different plants and what they look like and how to identify them, and some interesting fun facts about each plant. Alright, so the first plant that we're going to talk about in today's video is the blue violet, and these are actually native to Virginia, and so these actually don't grow taller than 8 inches in height, and so these are actually really young, and they can be identified by the heart-shaped deep green leaves, and they have 5 petals on each flower. So here's a little bit more of a close-up image of the blue violet flower. You can see here that there are 5 petals on each flower, and the flowers are very vibrant purple. And you can also see here the bushy green leaves that cover the ground almost completely. You can see the heart shape of each leaf, and you can also see just how short this plant is. It's not very tall at all. Most adult plants never make it past 8 inches in height. So these plants actually house the fritillary butterfly eggs. So what they do is they lay their eggs on these plants and then they hatch and eat the leaves. And these plants also have another species known as the Confederate violet, and those are actually more of a white flower rather than purple. And so the leaves and flowers of these plants are actually very medicinal. They're edible. If you mash the leaves up, you can make a paste and externally apply it to yourself, and it supposedly relieves headaches and colds, and it's also thought of to decrease your cancer risk. So before I go over my next plant, this is actually Toby. He's my buddy. He's my roommate's dog. He's very cute. He's a black-mouthed cur, and he's very great helper with finding all these plants. So our next plant is going to be the Downy Serviceberry tree. It's named the Serviceberry because by the time it blooms, it's usually believed that it's warm enough to dig graves and have a funeral service. So that's actually a very interesting fact about this plant. You can identify the Downy Serviceberry flowers by the 5 petals, and the bark is actually a grayish color. The older trees actually have vertical cracks down the bark, and that's how you can identify it as well. And the younger trees have very smooth bark. So here in this picture you can really see how smooth the bark on the young trees really is. And you can also begin to see that ashy gray color of the bark. This ashy gray color is actually why this tree is commonly confused for the American beech tree. In this picture you can see a more close-up view of the flowers. You can see how they have 5 white petals to each flower and how they grow in little clusters at the tip of each branch. Another fact about these trees is that when they're mature, they the Native Americans actually used to use their bark and sticks as arrow shafts. And that's another interesting fact. Alright, so the third plant and last plant that I'm going to be talking about in today's video is the red dead nettle plant. And this plant is actually an invasive non-native species. It's identified by the purple tops and the flowers, and they generally have long stems and then a cluster of leaves at the top. And they're named the dead nettle because they're actually evolved to look like actual nettle plants to deter predators. And they're toxic to dogs, so we're not letting Toby eat them, but they're actually edible for humans, and the top purple parts actually taste very sweet. Now in this picture you can see a close-up image of the red dead nettles. You can see that they have the purple tops and they have little purple flowers intermittent between their leaves, which are all clustered together on top of a long stem. These plants actually don't have nettles on them. They don't sting you if you were to touch them. They are called dead nettles because of the fact that they don't have nettles, but they evolved to look like nettles to deter predators. These plants are actually extremely invasive since they're non-native, and you can find them almost anywhere. You can find them by the sidewalk, you can find them next to trees, you can find them in fields and meadows. They're just everywhere, and they're invasive, and they're beginning to choke out other native species that need the space. So now I'm going to introduce non-native and invasive species of plants. An invasive species is a non-native plant species brought to the U.S. by settlers, tourists, and travelers. They become invasive when they steal the nutrients and space or even begin to physically suffocate native plants, and this causes native plants to actually begin to go extinct or become more rare or more difficult to find. And some non-native plants can be beneficial. They can distract foraging predators from eating native species. They can fertilize the soil to further nourish native species. Most non-native species are not beneficial, and they actually have a great impact on ecosystems and the environment. And we can actually all help to prevent further introduction of invasive species by following leave no trace guidelines and leaving things the way that we find them when we go out in nature. So if you see a flower and you really want to pick it, just leave it there. Just look at it, take a picture of it, just leave it be. So the last thing I kind of want to talk about in this video is some ways that you can identify plants yourselves in your own house or in your own neighborhood. And one tool that I find really highly recommended is Google Lens. I have this on my phone. I have a Google Pixel, so it comes installed on my phone pre-existingly. It comes in the camera app if you also have a Google Pixel. Samsung's, you can probably get it in the Android store, and Apple phones, you could probably get it in the Apple store. And so for our post-class procedures, I'm going to challenge you guys to go out in your backyards or around in your neighborhood, and of course maintaining a 6-foot distance and staying in permitted areas, and take note of different plant species that you find. Use Google Lens or any other identification books or apps to confirm what you found, and take note of any rare species or invasive species. How can this information gathered affect your knowledge of the area around you? Is this why there's a lot of deer in this area? Is this why there's a lot of butterflies in this area sometimes? Just kind of think about how these plants can impact the ecosystem in your neighborhood. And that's going to be the end of today's video. Everyone stay safe, and let's all get through the coronavirus together.